So now we'll talk a little bit, obviously went through in some detail, the information that we provide, how we collect it, how it gets used. What we're looking at now is the view of an individual company report within the RiskRecon portal. So what you're seeing here, company name, a number of different elements across the top, but we'll jump right in the interest of time and talk about some of the specific information that we present and how that information gets used. So RiskRecon rates every company that we observe on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 being the worst, 10 being the best, 0 being the worst, whether you're looking at the overall rating for the company, which you see here, C or 6.1 out of 10, the individual security domain ratings, which you see below. So RiskRecon rates companies across 9 different security domains, software patching, application security, web encryption, and so forth. Within those domains, there are 36 unique security criteria that are rated. So again, scale of 0 to 10, whether you're looking at the domain, the domain or the security criteria score, and then we overlay an A through F scale on those as well. As you would imagine, A being the best, F being the lowest, really just to draw your attention to where organizations have more significant issues or concerns. I'll come back up here to the top in just a moment, but I'm going to scroll down very quickly. When I look at the company overview for this particular organization, something that you'll notice that's quite different with RiskRecon compared to competing solutions, we don't look at specifically an IP count. You'll see with a lot of solutions in this space that they may reference a specific number of IP addresses that are monitored. We take a different approach, as I had kind of discussed previously, to how we look at an organization, and we create a much more thorough IT footprint for that company. So going through that process that I talked about before, going out and discovering all those assets, crawling all those systems, directly observing all that information, starting with just company name and domain. In this case, we ultimately discovered 215 registered domains for this organization. We discovered 54 net blocks that they own and operate on the internet. We discovered hosting across 38 different hosting providers. We see hosting in 11 different countries. And across that extended footprint, we found 395 active internet-facing systems that we were able to crawl, gather data from, and use that information as the basis of the population of systems that we've observed to produce the report for this organization. So scrolling back up to the top and kind of revisiting the concept of scoring and rating and how that's done within RiskRecon, scores and the ratings within RiskRecon are based on a combination of the issue rate across that population of systems in a particular area, as well as the risk level of issue. So if I jump into something like software patching, and we start to think about how might we leverage this information as a part of our assessment process, and we'll talk specifically about, let's just go with a onboarding assessment for an organization. Again, as we mentioned before, a typical process might be to send out a questionnaire. The company is going to respond to that questionnaire with some of the information, perhaps policies, statements that they are or aren't doing certain things that might be requested in that questionnaire. But ultimately, there's not a great method, if you wanted to validate that information, not a great method for doing that other than jumping to something like a desktop assessment, an on-site assessment, maybe doing penetration testing, which can be obviously not just ineffective from cost ineffective to do, but also something that can be very labor intensive. So do you have the resources to perform those types of assessments? When we look at something like software patching and RiskRecon, for example, just looking at the summary metrics, we're already getting a sense for how this organization is managing the environment that's under their control. In this case, we've made 287 observations. That means 287 instances where I can determine the type, where we've gathered enough information to determine the type and version of software that's running on that system. Out of those 287 observations, 10 of those systems are running end-of-life or unsupported software. So in this case, we're looking at overall about a 3% issue rate across their environment, giving me a better understanding, are they really managing that environment well? In this case, I would say it looks like there's probably, a decent understanding of what that environment looks like and that they're maintaining software patching across that extended environment that they have. Compare that to someone where you may see an organization that has a 10, 15, 20% issue rate. Really gives you a better sense for when you start to compare that to responses to a questionnaire, whether or not that organization is really doing the things that they've told you through attestation that they do. As I want to kind of grow my understand what's driving that, as I mentioned before, the ratings you're seeing in RiskRecon, so in this case the 7.3 out of 10, is being driven by the issue rate in the underlying criteria along with the risk level of issues. Looks like on application server, OpenSSL, and CMS patching, which are 3 of the 4 security criteria within software patching, this organization is doing a reasonably good job. Web server patching, the rating is a bit lower, and if I were to expand that out, well, actually first, if I were to look at the statistics, a population of 198, an issue count of 9, so a 5% issue rate within web server patching. If I expand that out and take a closer look, in this case, I'm seeing the full version of software, IP address of the system. I realize those are not valid IP addresses. This has been masked for the demonstration. IP address of the system, full host name, how many days we've seen that particular issue in the wild, and then this, as I mentioned before, this concept of the system's asset value and the issue severity of that particular issue that we've discovered. In this case, it looks like we've assigned a critical severity level to the issue, and the issue in this case is running IIS-6, which is a very much end-of-life version of IIS with a number of vulnerabilities associated with it. But I can see in this case, towards the bottom, I have 2 versions I have IIS running on 2 systems, but in this case, the system value, one is a high-value asset, one's a medium-value asset, which results in a different risk priority. So you have the ability within RiskRecon to understand what it is that is driving what issues we've discovered, why we would prioritize one issue higher than another. If I were to click on any of these systems, I can see, for example, why we've called this particular system out as a high-value asset. Again, being able to click on any of those systems. In this case, it looks like here's one where we've discovered authentication. So ultimately, why we've determined it's a high-value asset, why we're classifying as such, and why, in this case, that particular issue would bubble to the top of the list. Now, we notice this is driving a score of a 6.7 in this case. If these issues were lower risk priority, same issue rate, say 5%, but the bulk of the issues were risk priority 2, 3, 4, whatever that might be, the score would actually be higher in this area. So again, it's that combination of not just the issue rate, but also the risk level of issue that we've discovered that's driving the rating in a particular area, which rolls up to the security domain rating, which again really helps you better understand big picture, how is this organization managing their environment? Are they doing things well organization-wide? Are there perhaps gaps in how they apply their policies or perhaps how well their policies are understood internally? Scrolling down just a bit, one other element just on the overview, realize we don't have a ton of time. There's a lot of other capabilities within RiskRecon, but we'll keep it kind of focused on some of the high-level information for the purposes of this conversation. Another really dimension of performance that we provide is that risk priority matrix. I mentioned this on the slides, but just to give you an understanding of what that looks like, this is the risk priority matrix for the organization that we're looking at. And this is the same organization, these are the same issues that are ultimately driving the ratings that you see up above. So across the 36 different measurement areas, we have, if I were to count this up, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5, maybe 600 issues across their entire environment. But at the end of the day, not all of those issues represent the same level of risk. And so, as you can see here, we've plotted these issues based, again, on the issue severity that we see in combination with the asset value of those systems. And out of those 4, 5, 600 issues, we've determined there are 11 that are what we would call risk priority 1, critical severity issues impacting high-value assets. When we talk about efficiency and really, increasing capacity and taking or leveraging the data to be more efficient and effective, here's a perfect example of, now as an organization, if I need to dig in a bit deeper, do some additional investigation on a vendor that I'm working with, I would recommend, RiskRecon would recommend, you focus on the things that are in the upper right-hand corner first. Focus on the issues impacting high-value assets, so systems that are collecting or protecting more sensitive data, and allocate resources to those investigations or additional due diligence, perhaps filtering out or paying less attention initially to some of the lower risk issues that you might see. So leveraging that combination of the security rating, the big picture, how is this organization doing, across the entire footprint of that organization, in combination with how does that organization manage specific risks? Do we see a higher than anticipated level of high-risk activity? Do we see that they have high-risk issues that are staying open for an extended period of time? And really leveraging those 2 pieces of information to help you make better decisions around, again, who you assess, perhaps how frequently you assess those organizations. Can you validate and give that additional level of assurance when you're working with a vendor that they are, in fact, maintaining that environment in between those episodic assessments? and that when they're not, you have the ability to really tactically engage with those companies, react, and then ultimately drive improvement in their environment.